For my 38th birthday, I received the perfect gift, freedom. Not the kind wrapped in shiny paper with a bow on top, but the kind that comes in a manila envelope with legal letterhead and the bitter taste of vindication. My name is Daniel Westbrook, though most people call me Danny. I'm 38 years old and I run a logistics company that's worth more than most people could imagine. But 6 months ago, my own family thought I was a failure. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to 6 months ago when I still thought my marriage to Catherine Hartwell Westbrook was salvageable, and I hadn't yet realized that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is let them destroy you exactly the way they want to. But first, let me set the scene at the Meridian, Catherine's choice for my birthday dinner, which should have been my first clue that something was off. My wife had always considered the place pretentious, with its $32 entrees and waitstaff who acted like they were doing you a personal favor by bringing you overpriced salmon. But there we were, Catherine practically vibrating with nervous energy while her family assembled around the table like a tribunal. Patricia Hartwell, my mother-in-law, sat at the head of the table wearing what I'd learned to recognize as her serious business expression. The woman had spent 15 years climbing the corporate ladder at a marketing firm before early retirement, and she'd never quite shed the boardroom intensity that made every family dinner feel like a quarterly review where I was consistently underperforming. Nathan, Catherine's younger brother, kept checking his phone and avoiding eye contact. Lauren, the older sister, had that carefully neutral lawyer face she wore when she knew something I didn't. Even Lauren's husband, Dave, seemed uncomfortable, which was saying something since Dave could find common ground with a brick wall. "So," Patricia said, reaching into her purse with the deliberate movements of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "We have something for you, Daniel." She pulled out a manila envelope, not the festive birthday card I might have expected. Something about her tone made the entire restaurant seem quieter, like other diners could sense drama brewing at our table. "From all of us," she added, and I caught Catherine raising her phone, angling it toward me like she was documenting something for posterity. I opened the envelope. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." The words seemed to float off the page for a moment before settling into my consciousness like lead weights. Here's the thing about moments like this. Everyone expects you to react a certain way. They want the shock, the anger, maybe some begging or emotional breakdown that confirms their narrative about who you are and what you deserve. Catherine's phone was still recording, probably hoping to capture my humiliation for whatever story they'd tell their friends about how they finally freed themselves from disappointing Danny. Instead, I pulled out my pen and signed every page that required my signature. Clean, legible strokes like I was endorsing a check. The silence that followed was extraordinary. You know that moment in movies when all the background noise cuts out and you're left with pure crystalline quiet? It was exactly like that, except this was real life, and the quiet was filled with the weight of expectations completely subverted. Catherine's phone slipped from her hands. Nathan's mouth actually fell open. Even Dave, who'd been focused on his bread plate, looked up with sudden interest. If you enjoy stories about unexpected revenge, family drama, and turning the tables on people who underestimate you, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Every day brings completely new stories, each one more gripping than the last. "Thank you," I said, sliding the signed papers back across the table. "This is exactly what I needed." I stood up, pulled out my wallet, and placed 5 20s on the table. "This should cover my share. Happy birthday to me." Walking out of the Meridian that night wasn't just leaving a restaurant. It was stepping out of a role I'd been playing for 5 years without realizing it was a performance. The thing about marriage is that it dies slowly, then all at once. Like that Hemingway quote about going bankrupt, except instead of money, you're losing the ability to see your spouse as someone who's fundamentally on your side. 6 months before my birthday revelation, I was still trying to fix things. Still believing that Catherine's increasing distance was something we could work through with better communication, maybe some couples therapy, definitely more effort on my part to be the husband she deserved. I was working late in my home office, reviewing contracts for Westbrook Logistics Solutions. The business had grown significantly over the past 3 years, but Catherine seemed less interested in my work with each passing month. When I'd try to share exciting developments, like landing the pharmaceutical distribution contract or the Department of Defense logistics deal, her eyes would glaze over with polite disinterest. "That's nice, honey," she'd say, not looking up from her phone. "Will you be working late again tonight?" The tone suggested that working late was some kind of character flaw, rather than the reason we could afford our suburban lifestyle. But I ignored the edge in her voice because I was still operating under the assumption that we were a team. Around 10 p.m., I decided to grab a beer and see if Catherine wanted to watch something together. As I passed the living room, I could hear her on the phone with that low, conspiratorial tone people use when they're discussing secrets. "I know, Mom," she was saying, "but I can't just leave, not without a plan." I stopped in the hallway, not intending to eavesdrop but unable to ignore the context of that particular sentence. "The job at Meridian Marketing looks promising," Catherine continued. "Lauren thinks I could make a strong case for alimony, especially given how much I've supported his business over the years." Supported my business. Catherine had attended exactly 3 work events in 5 years and consistently referred to my company as Danny's little logistics thing when people asked what I did for a living. "Nathan says his friend at Hartwell and Associates could handle the legal work," she went on. Keep it in the family. Make sure everything's handled properly." I stood there in my own hallway, listening to my wife plan the dissolution of our marriage with the same casual efficiency she used to organize dinner parties. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, covering everything from asset division to the timing of when she'd move out. She'd already found an apartment, already researched divorce lawyers, already calculated how much she thought she could get from me in the settlement. When she finally hung up, I crept back to my office and sat in the dark, trying to process what I'd just heard. This wasn't a woman having doubts about her marriage or struggling with temporary relationship issues. This was someone who'd already checked out emotionally and was now working through the logistics of her exit strategy. The rational part of my brain knew I should confront her, ask for couples therapy, suggest we work on our problems together, maybe even consider the possibility that she had valid reasons for wanting out. But another part of me, the part that had been quietly cataloging years of dismissive comments and eye rolls and "that's nice, honey" responses, was already calculating different possibilities. If Catherine wanted to treat our marriage like a business transaction, maybe it was time to approach it like the businessman I actually was. Understanding Catherine required understanding the Hartwells, and understanding the Hartwells required recognizing that every family has its mythology. Theirs was built around the idea that Patricia had single-handedly raised 3 successful children after her husband's death when Catherine was 12. Patricia loved to tell the story at dinner parties. How she'd gone back to school, earned her MBA, climbed the corporate ladder at Morrison Marketing while somehow managing to get all 3 kids through college and into respectable careers. It was an impressive story, and she wore it like armor against anyone who might question her judgment or authority. The problem with family mythologies is that they create expectations. Nathan was supposed to be the golden boy, following in his mother's corporate footsteps. Lauren was the responsible one, using her law degree to provide stability and wisdom. And Catherine was supposed to be the creative one, the one who'd find a successful professional husband and live the kind of life Patricia never had the chance to pursue. Instead, Catherine had married me, a guy who ran a logistics company out of a converted warehouse, who wore jeans to work and thought business casual meant adding a belt. To Patricia, I represented everything Catherine was supposed to rise above. "Daniel runs a small business," Patricia would say when introducing me at social gatherings, and somehow she made small business sound like moderately successful drug dealer. The phrase was always delivered with a tight smile that suggested she was being polite despite enormous personal restraint. Nathan, meanwhile, had landed a director position at TechFlow Solutions right out of his MBA program. He was exactly the kind of son-in-law Patricia had envisioned. Corporate credentials, stock options, and the ability to discuss quarterly earnings with the same enthusiasm other people reserve for sports teams. "Nathan's company just went public," Patricia announced at last year's Christmas dinner. "The IPO exceeded all expectations. Isn't that exciting?" She turned to me with that expectant look that meant I was supposed to ask follow-up questions about Nathan's incredible success. Instead, I just nodded and changed the subject, which probably confirmed every negative assumption she'd ever made about my lack of ambition. Lauren was more subtle in her judgment, but no less effective. As a family law attorney, she had plenty of professional reasons to view marriage as a potentially risky financial arrangement. She'd seen too many women walk away from divorces with less than they deserved because they hadn't protected themselves properly. She'd said to Catherine during one of their sister conversations I'd accidentally overheard, "It's always smart to maintain some financial independence. Just in case. Like marriage was a business venture that might not work out, and Catherine should be prepared to cut her losses if I didn't deliver adequate returns on her investment." The irony was that I actually liked the Hartwell family individually. Patricia was sharp and accomplished. Nathan was genuinely good at his job. Lauren gave thoughtful legal advice and had a dry sense of humor that could catch you off guard. Even Dave, Lauren's husband, was a decent guy who shared my interest in craft beer and classic movies. But together they formed a collective judgment machine that had decided I wasn't quite good enough for Catherine. And their disappointment created a kind of gravitational pull that slowly drew Catherine away from our marriage and toward their alternative vision of what her life should look like. While Patricia was telling her bridge club about her daughter's underachieving husband and Catherine was researching divorce attorneys, I was quietly building something that would make Nathan's corporate success look like a lemonade stand. Westbrook Logistics Solutions had started small, just me and a couple of trucks handling regional supply chain management. But I'd always thought bigger than regional. I'd studied companies that had scaled from local operations to national contractors, and I understood that growth required three things: the right partnerships, government connections, and the patience to play a very long game. The first major acquisition was Morrison Freight, a struggling company with excellent Department of Defense relationships. The owner, Jim Morrison, was ready to retire, but didn't want to sell to a corporate giant that would eliminate jobs and gut the operation. I offered him something better, a partnership where he'd stay on as a consultant, retain equity in the combined company, and help me navigate the labyrinthine world of government contracting. Catherine barely acknowledged the acquisition. "That's nice, honey," she said when I told her about the deal. "Does this mean you'll be traveling more?" If she'd asked even basic questions about Morrison Freight, she might have learned that Jim Morrison had spent 20 years building relationships with military logistics coordinators, that his client list included contracts for overseas base supply, emergency response coordination, and strategic equipment positioning, that the acquisition had just transformed Westbrook Logistics from a regional player into a company with national security clearances. But Catherine didn't ask questions. Neither did Patricia or Nathan, who were too focused on quarterly stock reports and corporate ladder climbing to pay attention to what the small business owner was actually building. The second major move came 18 months later: Crawford Cold Storage, a specialized company handling pharmaceutical and medical supply logistics. They'd gotten hit hard by a contamination scare that wasn't even their fault, but the media attention had destroyed their stock price and left them vulnerable to acquisition. I borrowed against everything I owned to make that deal happen. The house, my personal savings, even my car went up as collateral. It was the kind of risk that could have destroyed me financially if it hadn't worked out. "What's all this paperwork?" Catherine asked when she found me reviewing acquisition documents at the kitchen table. "Just expanding the business," I told her. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Good," she said, grabbing her coffee and heading out to meet friends for lunch. "As long as it doesn't affect our lifestyle." Our lifestyle, right? Because the money I was risking was somehow our money, but the business decisions were mine alone to worry about. If Catherine had stuck around for 5 more minutes, she might have learned that Crawford Cold Storage had exclusive contracts with 3 major pharmaceutical companies and a partnership with FedEx that was worth $18 million annually. She might have understood that combining Morrison's government connections with Crawford's pharmaceutical expertise was creating something unprecedented in the industry. But Catherine had yoga class, and later she was getting her nails done, and somewhere in between all that essential activity, she was researching divorce attorneys and calculating how much she deserved for putting up with her disappointing husband's lack of ambition. The Department of Defense contract came through 2 years ago. $75 million over 3 years for comprehensive logistics support in Southeast Asia, with options for renewal that could double that amount. When the Pentagon procurement officer called with the news, I had to ask him to repeat it because I couldn't quite process what I was hearing. In the space of a single phone call, Westbrook Logistics Solutions had gone from a mid-sized regional company to a major national security contractor. We were going to need to hire 80 new employees, lease additional facilities, and probably buy a fleet of specialized vehicles just to handle the first year of the contract. That night, I took Catherine to dinner at the most expensive restaurant in the city. I ordered champagne, made a toast to new opportunities, and tried to share my excitement about what we'd built together. "That's wonderful, honey," she said, but her attention was already drifting to her phone. "Nathan got promoted to senior director this week."
"Did I tell you?"
Patricia is so proud. Nathan's promotion to senior director at a company he didn't own, making decisions he didn't control, collecting a salary that was impressive until you compared it to owning a $75 million government contract. But Catherine was right to be proud of Nathan. Corporate success was measurable, respectable, easy to explain at dinner parties. What I was building was harder to categorize. and the Hartwell family had never been comfortable with ambiguity. Here's the thing I didn't understand until much later. Catherine wasn't just planning to leave me. She was trying to find herself after years of feeling lost in a life that didn't quite fit. When we got married, Catherine had a communications degree and vague plans about working in marketing or public relations. But then I started making good money, and it seemed easier for her to focus on our home life while I built the business. She'd handle the domestic stuff, decorating, social planning, managing our calendar, while I focused on growing the company. It seemed like a reasonable division of labor at the time. Catherine was good at the social aspects of life that I found draining. She could throw dinner parties that impressed my clients, remember birthdays and anniversaries, maintain the kind of lifestyle that suggested we were successful without being flashy about it. But somewhere along the way, Catherine had started feeling like a supporting character in her own life. She'd wake up at 9 a.m. with no particular place to be. She'd spend afternoons running errands that could have been completed in an hour. She'd meet friends for lunch and listen to their stories about work drama, office politics, career advancement, and professional recognition while having nothing similar to contribute to the conversation. What do you do? People would ask at parties. Oh, I'm married to Daniel. He runs a logistics company. I help with, the home front. The home front, like she was managing some kind of domestic military operation instead of just trying to fill the hours between when I left for work and when I came home for dinner. Patricia, sensing her daughter's restlessness, had started making suggestions. Gentle at first, then increasingly direct. Sweetheart, you have so much potential. It seems like a waste to just wait around while Daniel builds his little business. Meridian Marketing is looking for someone with your background. I know the hiring manager. I could make some calls. It's never too late to start over. Look at me. I didn't really hit my stride until after your father died. The job interviews had started 6 months ago. Around the same time, I'd overheard the phone conversation about divorce planning. Catherine was genuinely excited about the possibility of working again, of having her own income and professional identity independent of my success or failure. The problem was that she'd been out of the workforce for 5 years. Her degree was from a decent state school, but she had no recent experience, no portfolio of work, no professional references who could vouch for her current skills. The communications industry had changed dramatically since she'd graduated, and she was competing against candidates who'd been building careers while she'd been building what exactly? The rejection letters were polite but consistent. While your educational background is impressive, we're looking for someone with more recent experience in the field. Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates. We'll keep your resume on file for future opportunities that might be a better fit. Each rejection was a small confirmation of her worst fears about herself, that she'd wasted years of her life playing house instead of building something meaningful, that she'd become financially dependent on a husband she was growing to resent, that she was trapped in a marriage with a man who saw her as a pleasant accessory rather than a partner with her own ambitions and potential. Lauren, watching her sister's struggles, had offered legal perspective. Kat, you've been supporting Daniel's career for 5 years, maintaining the home, managing social obligations, providing the stability that allowed him to focus on business. That has real value in divorce proceedings, supporting my career. The same career Catherine had consistently dismissed as Daniel's little logistics thing. But Lauren was right that Catherine had handled domestic responsibilities while I focused on work. The question was whether that arrangement had been mutually beneficial, or whether it had trapped Catherine in a role that was slowly suffocating her sense of self. I didn't understand any of this at the time. I saw Catherine's job search as a hobby, something to keep her busy rather than a desperate attempt to reclaim her identity. When she'd mentioned interviews or rejection letters, I'd offered generic encouragement. I'm sure something will work out or the right opportunity will come along, without recognizing that she was fighting for her professional life. By the time I overheard the divorce planning conversation, Catherine had already mentally checked out of our marriage. She wasn't plotting against me out of malice or greed. She was trying to escape what felt like a prison of financial dependence and social irrelevance. The tragedy was that we'd both been building toward the same goal, Catherine's professional independence, but we'd been building in opposite directions, never communicating about what we actually wanted or how we might achieve it together. After overhearing Catherine's divorce planning session with Patricia, I spent 3 sleepless nights trying to decide how to respond. The rational part of my brain said I should confront her directly. Sit down, have an honest conversation about our problems, maybe suggest couples therapy or marriage counseling, try to rebuild whatever emotional connection we'd lost over the past few years. But another part of me, The part that had been quietly cataloging years of dismissive comments and eye rolls was already thinking strategically about different possibilities. If Catherine wanted to treat our marriage like a business transaction, maybe it was time to approach it like the businessman I actually was. I called my attorney, Rebecca Martinez, the next morning. Rebecca had been handling my business legal work for 3 years, so she understood the complexities of corporate structure and asset protection. She also had a reputation for aggressive advocacy that made other lawyers nervous. I need to discuss some hypothetical asset protection strategies, I told her when she picked up. How hypothetical are we talking? Rebecca asked. She'd heard hypothetical before, and she knew it usually meant someone was about to need very real legal advice. Let's say someone might try to claim half of everything I've built, including parts of my business, in the very near future. There was a pause, then that predatory chuckle Rebecca reserved for cases where she got to protect her clients' interests against people who'd underestimated them. How near future are we talking? Could be any day now. Then we better schedule a meeting today. 3 hours later, I was sitting in Rebecca's downtown office, looking out at the city skyline while she laid out a strategy that was both perfectly legal and ruthlessly effective. First thing, she said, pulling out a legal pad and starting to take notes. We restructure everything for legitimate business purposes. The house becomes corporate property. Westbrook Logistics needs a headquarters, right? Your personal investments get reorganized under corporate holdings for tax optimization. Everything we're doing is completely legal and financially sound. What about the divorce itself? If they're filing based on your current declared income, they're going to be disappointed. Your salary last year was essentially minimal because everything was structured as corporate distributions and reinvestment. They're asking for half of personal assets that amount to maybe $30,000 in checking accounts and a car. Rebecca was right. While Catherine and Patricia were planning to claim half of everything I'd built, they were doing so based on the assumption that I was just a small business owner with modest personal wealth. They had no idea about the corporate restructuring, the government contracts, or the actual value of what they were about to walk away from. There's something else, Rebecca continued. I know you're hurt and angry, and you have every right to be, but I want you to think carefully about what you actually want here. Revenge is satisfying, but it's also limiting. If there's any chance you want to save this marriage, now is the time to have that conversation. I appreciated Rebecca's perspective, but I'd already moved past the possibility of reconciliation. Catherine hadn't come to me with concerns about our marriage or requests for change. She'd gone to her mother, her siblings, and a divorce attorney. She'd made plans to leave, calculated financial settlements, and researched apartments without ever giving me the opportunity to address whatever problems she was experiencing. I want to protect what I've built, I said, and I want them to understand exactly what they're choosing to walk away from. Rebecca nodded. Then let's get to work. Over the next 2 weeks, we restructured everything. The house became corporate property, leased back to me at market rate. Personal investments moved into offshore holdings and corporate accounts. My will was updated to leave everything to my niece, Emma, Sam's daughter, who was 16 and had never once treated me like a disappointment. I left Catherine exactly $1. Not out of pettiness, but because leaving someone nothing in a will can be contested. Leaving them $1 sends a clear message. I remembered you existed, and I decided you were worth exactly this much. But here's what I couldn't quite admit to Rebecca or myself at the time. Part of me was hoping Catherine would figure out what she was about to lose and change her mind. That somewhere in the process of planning my financial destruction, she'd realize we could solve our problems more effectively as partners than as adversaries. I was still holding on to the possibility that the woman I'd married was in there somewhere, buried under years of family pressure and professional frustration, waiting for the right moment to choose our marriage over her mother's disappointment. That hope died the night before my birthday, when I overheard Catherine on the phone with Lauren discussing the timeline for serving divorce papers. I want to do it publicly, Catherine was saying. Somewhere he can't make a scene or try to talk me out of it. Mom thinks the Meridian would be perfect. Classy enough that he'll have to behave himself, but public enough that he can't pretend this isn't really happening. Public humiliation as a strategic choice. Catherine wasn't just planning to leave me. She was planning to maximize my embarrassment in the process. That's when I understood that the woman I'd married had been replaced by someone who saw me as an obstacle to her happiness rather than a partner in building it. Game on, Catherine. Game on. But what happened next? Well, stay tuned to see how this revenge story unfolds. Walking out of the Meridian that night wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the most interesting chapter. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new penthouse office, looking out at the city I've conquered while my ex-family thought I was failing. The view from the 42nd floor is spectacular, especially at sunset when the light turns everything golden and possibilities seem infinite. Catherine's divorce papers were indeed the perfect gift. Not because they freed me from a bad marriage, though they did, but because they forced me to choose between the life I'd been living and the life I was capable of creating. The settlement was even more brutal than Rebecca had predicted. Catherine walked away with exactly what she'd asked for. Half of my declared personal assets, which amounted to roughly $15,000, and a car payment. The house was corporate property, unreachable. The business was structured in ways that made her claims legally impossible. Her alimony request was calculated based on an income that existed only on paper. Patricia called me exactly once after the financial reality became clear. "We need to talk about this misunderstanding," she said, her voice carrying none of its usual authority. "Catherine is devastated. She never intended for things to go this far." "There's no misunderstanding, Patricia," I replied. "Catherine got exactly what she asked for, a divorce from her disappointing husband. But the money, your business, we didn't realize." "That's the point," I said. "You never asked. For 5 years you assumed I was failing because I wasn't succeeding in ways you recognized. Catherine's free now to build the life she actually wants, and I'm free to build mine. Everyone wins. The irony is perfect. Catherine has her independence now, along with a decent job at Meridian Marketing that Patricia's connections helped her secure. Nathan is still climbing the corporate ladder, making impressive salary increases that look small next to government contract revenues. Lauren continues providing legal advice to family members who probably should have consulted her before serving divorce papers to someone with significant assets. And me? I wake up every morning in my own space, make my own decisions, and build my empire without someone else's family telling me I'm not ambitious enough. The best part is that Catherine is actually happier now. She has work she enjoys, colleagues who respect her abilities, and the professional identity she'd been craving for years. She's building something meaningful on her own terms, and she's discovering that she's more capable than anyone gave her credit for. We run into each other occasionally at industry events. The logistics and marketing worlds overlap more than you'd expect, and we're cordial in the way that people can be when they've survived a disaster together and come out stronger on the other side. "You look good, Danny," she said at the last Chamber of Commerce gathering. "Success suits you. You too, Kat. I'm glad the Meridian job worked out." We stood there for a moment, two people who'd shared 5 years of marriage and were now sharing something more like mutual respect. We'd both gotten what we needed, even if the process had been more brutal than necessary. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "The way we handled things, the public papers, the assumption about your finances, that wasn't fair." "We were both trying to solve the right problem," I replied. "We just had different ideas about how to solve it." Catherine nodded, and for a moment I could see the woman I'd married. Still there, but stronger now, more confident in her own abilities and less dependent on other people's approval. "Maybe we could have coffee sometime," she suggested. "Not for, just to talk. As friends." "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. The truth is, Catherine's divorce papers didn't just give me freedom. They gave both of us permission to become the people we were capable of being instead of the people we thought we were supposed to be. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is letting them destroy you exactly the way they need to. It reveals who they really are. And more importantly, it reveals who you really are when you're not trying to live up to someone else's expectations. My 38th birthday was indeed the perfect celebration. Not because I got revenge on people who'd underestimated me, but because I got something much more valuable. The chance to build a life that actually fit who I was becoming instead of who I'd always been. That's a gift worth celebrating, even if it came wrapped in legal documents and served with a side of public humiliation. Especially then. A year later, Westbrook Logistics Solutions employs 200 people and has expanded into international supply chain management. The company was featured on the cover of Industry Weekly with the headline "From Startup to Strategic, the government contractor that's reshaping logistics." The article mentioned my unconventional background and innovative approach to corporate growth without once using the phrase small business owner. Patricia saw the article. Catherine texted me congratulations. Nathan connected with me on LinkedIn, which felt like some kind of professional détente. The penthouse is exactly what I'd hoped it would be, a space that reflects success without apology, comfort without compromise. I've got a home office with the best view in the city, a kitchen where I actually cook instead of just grabbing takeout, and enough space to think without someone else's opinion about how I should live my life. I'm dating someone new, Sarah, a federal contracting attorney who understands both my work and my divorce story without judgment. She finds the whole thing more amusing than tragic, which is probably the right perspective. You got served divorce papers at your birthday dinner and somehow turned it into the best thing that ever happened to you, she said after I told her the story. That's either brilliant or completely insane. Why not both? I replied. Emma, my niece, is applying to colleges now. She knows about the trust fund, but she also knows she'll only get access to it if she builds something meaningful with her own life first. I don't want to be just some rich kid, she told me last Christmas. I want to earn it. She's going to do fine. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Catherine and I had just talked to each other instead of making assumptions about what the other person wanted. If she told me she felt trapped in domestic life, I might have encouraged her career development. If I'd explained what I was building with the business, she might have been more supportive of the long hours and financial risks. But that's alternate history, and alternate history is the enemy of contentment. We got the ending we both needed, even if it wasn't the ending either of us expected. The real lesson isn't about revenge or vindication or even about understanding your worth. It's about recognizing when someone is trying to give you exactly what you need, even when they think they're trying to destroy you. Catherine's divorce papers weren't an attack on my character or a judgment of my value as a partner. They were a gift from someone who'd figured out what she needed to be happy and was brave enough to reach for it, even when reaching meant burning down the life we'd built together. That takes courage. The kind of courage I needed to find in myself before I could build something worthy of the success I'd always wanted but never quite believed I deserved. So thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you to everyone who underestimated me just long enough for me to surprise myself with what I was actually capable of achieving. The divorce papers were indeed the perfect gift. They just weren't the gift you thought you were giving. If you enjoyed this story about turning betrayal into triumph and the power of strategic thinking, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.